Hey everyone, I'm Father Alexander Har,
And I'm the Reverend David J. Marshall.
and this is A Bridge Between, where we bridge our knowledge of the gospel, we bridge our friendship together because we live in two different areas. And this week we're starting, you might say, a new series of bridges, which is the Bridges of Parables.
Yes, parabolic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun. So, you know the actor Michael J. Fox?
Oh, yes.
Yes. Do you know what the J stands for?
Nope.
What his middle name is?
Nope.
No guesses?
James?
Andrew. I know. It was a trivia question. We were playing a trivia game. And what is Michael J. Fox's middle name? The answer is Andrew, but he changed it to J because it sounds better. Yeah. See,
I got,
little known facts.
I've got nowhere to go with that, so
Well, no, but we can draw a parallel. Well, sorry, we can draw a parable from
a
it.
parable. There you go.
Parable. That the name that he used for acting isn't actually who he is because he's an actor. Brilliant. Thank you. Um, that, yeah. So there are lots of parables that we use in our life. So how would you describe a parable, Alex?
I've described it a couple different ways to my congregation. Usually, I will say it is a story that Jesus tells that has kind of an unusual twist to it. You
Mm-hmm.
think it's going in one direction, and Jesus kind of fakes you out and goes in another direction. This
Hmm.
happens a lot with who you think is the villain is really the hero, and vice versa.
Hmm.
It's also a way of teaching that Jesus will use that is a big part of his culture. It's storytelling, but it presents a godly theme in a worldly way.
Hmm. I have a book, and it's called The Big Book of Jewish Jokes. Have I told you about this? Do you know that I have this book?
It makes a lot of sense now.
Right. He and I share jokes, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but when we're not recording. And one of the epitome of the Jewish joke is exactly that you're moving along in one direction, and then the punchline is a surprise direction. It changes everything. And this Jesus was part of his culture, and he was sharing his way of teaching. The one thing I love about parables is that it was a brilliant move because we can understand
Yeah.
today the images and the things he was talking about way back then. Um, like we're going to hear parables about, well, we're going to hear all sorts of ones. There's one about a woman who loses a coin.
Hmm.
She cleans her house till she finds it and she celebrates. There's a man who finds treasure buried in a field and he goes off and he spends everything he has to buy that field and then he gets
Right.
the treasure. These just fantastic parables and that still means something to us today. We all have lost something and have cleaned a house to try to find it. And then when we find it, we celebrate, right? That it's just wonderful.
And I think it's important to recognize as preachers that one of our tasks, which can be difficult, is to try to help people understand the images that Jesus is using.
Mhm.
Remember, he's looking around and he's seeing a very agrarian society. So that's why, last week we talked about a yoke, what they used to put animals together to pull.
Oh, I thought you
Because,
meant omelets, but yeah,
what was
that's
that?
I was yoking around. Sorry.
Yeah. But also, Jesus uses the images that are nearby, that
Hmm.
people are familiar with. And I think it's incumbent upon us as preachers in 2023 to sometimes relate these parables using the objects of our day. So, for example, you talked about losing, the gold coin.
Hmm.
I don't know too many people who have a gold coin. I mean, there may be some, but I don't know that many people who have a gold coin. But I will tell the parable of the lost cell phone. And who among you, having lost a cell phone, will not tear up all your couch cushions and look underneath your bed and ding it, or have somebody call your phone? And when you find it, do you not rejoice and call your best friend or your partner and say, I have found my phone, rejoice with me?
Hmm. And you call them on that phone, the one that you that you had previously thought
Exactly.
was lost. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a fiction show based apparently on something that was real. That a guy had some original bitcoins onto a hard drive
Oh.
and accidentally threw away the hard drive with a bunch of
Mhm.
other stuff.
Yep.
And in the fictional story, goes to the dump to find it, but that was based on a true
It's
story. That
absolutely true story.
yeah,
Millions of dollars.
millions of dollars, at least when that was. I don't know if it's still a million,
No.
but yeah, it's intriguing that that is a parable. That it is a way of teaching, of finding something of value and of contrasting or comparing from one to another. And we are going to hear some very strong contrasting images. So,
And I think one of the things to be aware of which to be aware is when Jesus is telling this story, the listener is really an active participant in the telling of the story because they're doing active listening. They're imagining themselves as a character in the story. They're trying to relate to something that Jesus is saying. So, for example, when we talk about the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? Of course, the
mhm.
twist is that the hero is the Samaritan.
Oh
When
yeah,
you and I at that time might have said, well, the hero is the priest because he's going to stop. That's not who Jesus
no.
says is the hero of the story. And so by our invested listening, we become a part of the story. And that, I believe, is the root of contemplative reading of Scripture, is placing ourselves in the midst and in the presence of the story.
Yes. And folks, so we're going to give you, we're going to read it. We're going to give you an interpretation. If you're hearing something different, um, then that clearly is that seed or that spirit working in you where you are hearing. And in preparation for today's broadcast, I have three massive tomes of people in various languages that have been ingesting this, and all three of them have a different way of looking at it. This is the other kind of mystical thing
Yeah.
about parables is that in the hearing we ingest it and have what it means to us. For instance, you know of people who are lactose intolerant that,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not, thankfully. So they could drink milk and I could drink milk, and what's going to happen internally? Totally different from each other, right? You, my friend, don't like spicy food, and I love spicy food.
Yep.
We can have the same spice, and you will have two different reactions by that. And so, what we're telling you is what we're experiencing, what Alex and I are experiencing today, but it doesn't mean that that's the only way to hear it.
And one caveat I do want to make is that there is there are boundaries
Okay.
within the listening and with the telling, and so one of the things I tell people of which they should be careful is to think about who Jesus was talking to, and to think
Hmm.
about what his intention was in using this parable, this story, to proclaim the kingdom of heaven. And so be careful of interpretations that go against the preaching of the kingdom of heaven or go against the idea of Jesus teaching and manifesting it in that way.
Yes. Use that as an umbrella for everything you hear.
Yeah.
That yes. That yeah. Jesus has a particular some guardrails that he is running down that street on, and within that street, you can hear a variety of different things.
Yeah.
So yeah, let me know when you're ready to jump in.
I would love for you to jump in with the parable.
All right. It's an awfully long one today, so I'm going to summarize briefly and then jump into the actual text. And did you want me to read it?
Oh, go ahead.
All right. So Jesus is sat down beside the sea. A large crowd had gathered, and then he went out and talked about a sower who went out to sow seeds. And some of them fell on the path. Some of the seeds fell on rocky ground. Some of them were scorched by the sun, and others' seeds fell among thorns. And then other seed fell on the actual soil and brought forth grain. So that's where we introduce this, and now it is the disciples telling us, or Jesus telling us through the disciples, what in the world he was talking about. So here it is. Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, The evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. This is what was sown on the path. As for what was sown on the rocky ground, this is the one, the person, who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet such a person has no root, but only endures for a while. And when trouble or persecution arises on the account of the word, that person immediately falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for what was sown on the good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. Here endeth the lesson.
All right.
All right. So what stands out for you in this today?
I think the thing that stands out for me is the life of a seed is not easy.
It's not.
I mean, Jesus is talking about the sower, the one who's going out to proclaim the word of the kingdom, meaning the news that the kingdom of God has come.
Mm-hmm.
And as it's being scattered around the hearts of the people who are receiving it, not everybody's going to receive it in such a way that it's going to grow, that it's going to bear fruit. And, just now in listening, we
Mm-hmm.
see that the condition of one's heart and the preparation that one has gone through in preparing to receive the word matters.
Mm-hmm.
There are times when I'll meet people who say, why don't I get it? Why don't I feel the love of God in my heart? Or why haven't I, multiplied this wonderful seed that has been planted within me of God's word?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is right here in this parable.
What would the answer be?
Well, the answer is, what is the condition of the person's heart? You know,
Mm-hmm.
do you have roots?
Mm-hmm.
Is your heart being choked out by the thorns of the world? These are the questions that we should be asking ourselves, because I think sometimes as people who are charged with evangelism as clergy, when really it's everybody's job,
Mm-hmm.
everybody's vocation, we'll ask ourselves, why aren't people believing? Why aren't people coming to Jesus? Well,
Yeah.
you were saying this earlier when we were talking about it. Our job is to share the word, but we can't receive it for somebody.
Right. And football season is around the corner.
Woohoo!
So we're the quarterbacks, we're not the receivers. So, we throw it or we snap the ball. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. But we're not dictating how the play is going to go. That's one way to do it. And the other thing, which we may wrap up with, but I wanted to highlight at this point,
Mm-hmm.
is the last phrase of who indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case, 100,
Mm-hmm.
and another 60, and
Another 30.
another 30,
Yeah.
right? That this yield is it. So you don't have to hit a home run every time, right? That I know I'm mixing sports metaphors now, but the idea is that for some, maybe for a lot, it's 30, right? For another, it's you get a yield of 60, and but for one, there's a hundredfold. In my opinion, a hundredfold would be somebody like Billy Graham, Martin Luther King Jr. That those folks are a hundredfold. That they're amazing, but most of the world has pastors like you and me. Um, so the 30-fold guys, but
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 that's
here, see here's what I would say, and this is where I disagree.
oh nice.
There you go. So when we talk about, well, these are the pastors that they have, I'm not arguing with that. I mean, they got their pastors.
Right.
But the 30-fold or the 60-fold or
Hmm.
the 100-fold has, it's not the seed that we're sowing. It's the heart that's receiving it, the soil that's ready. So
True.
now it is the job of the pastor. It is the job of those who lead
Hmm.
and those who minister to God's word to help prepare the soil. So for the person who's got a lot of thorns, are we caring for that person pastorally?
Hmm.
Are we also advising them on what actually matters in the world, which is not wealth and the pursuit
Hmm.
of wealth? So, I mean,
Hmm.
if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, we're helping people prepare their soil.
Hmm.
But the true measure of how much fruit, how much grain, or whatever you want to call it, is going to be born,
Hmm.
it's not you and I.
Right. Right.
Because, for example, there are people who I have met, who I have preached to for years. Somebody else comes along and says something, and the light bulb goes off.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Me too.
And it was just one thing that they said. That's why I
Yeah.
love to have different preachers come through the church with a different voice and a different, that's
Hmm.
why I'd like you and I to exchange pulpits one day.
Oh, that would be fun. I don't know
So,
if our congregations would agree, but for you and me, it would be a lot of
oh,
fun.
we'd be way too
Uh,
much fun.
we
Um,
would be. Yeah. I've been trying to figure out how we can do it together at the same place each time. But anyway, I don't know how that would
yeah.
work.
So
So,
the soil though is what I think at the heart of this parable, and Jesus is asking, what is the condition of your soil?
hmm,
What is the
yes.
area that you have prepared for the word?
Hmm. You also have reminded me of something. If we could start with the very beginning
Hmm.
about anyone who hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, it is snatched away, and what is sown in the
Hmm.
heart, that it goes away. So at St. John's School, it was a K through 8 school. So we had the preschool through third grade was one chapel service, and then fourth through eighth was the other. And at the end of the first chapel, which was pre-K through third, we had a particular celebration that shows up on the church calendar for folks that are um, in the Roman Catholic Church in Mexico, where you celebrate Mary. And you get a very particular treat, and there's hot chocolate and all sorts of. It's a wonderful celebration. And so I had just put forth a message about we have enough for everybody. You need to share. Make sure that your friend has his or her food before you get yours, and there's enough for everybody. So there's no reason to rush and knock the table over and spill everything like you did last year. Don't do that. But instead, the message is to share. And there is a kid. I'm not going to name any names. His initials are Antonio. He didn't receive that word, and so he pushed his way up to the front. He
Hmm.
grabbed several of the tasty treats and made several of his classmates very upset. And then his teacher pulled him off on the side and said, "Antonio, did you not hear this message about we need to share? There's enough for everybody,
Right.
but we're not to push and shove. I am now going to take what you have, and if there's enough left over, you will have some." And after everybody went through, Antonio went back to the table, and of course, there was enough. And he received one, and he received it with joy. And that the teacher had planted the seed, and it suddenly started to form in him. So it wasn't, I threw the seeds out there hoping he would listen. He didn't. But it's this interesting combination of somebody else working. And so if any of you have to deal with children, you must repeat yourself over and over and over again.
And it's also the idea that people need to hear more than one voice.
Yes, yes.
It's one thing if you and I get up on a Sunday morning and we preach.
Hmm.
The
That's one thing.
best sermons are the ones where a parent or a friend or a colleague reinforces what was said or says, "This is what I heard,
Hmm.
and how do you feel about it?" or what do you think of it?
Yeah.
Because that's really where it's gonna land.
Hmm. That's it. All right. Can we talk about the last part?
Oh, please. Yeah.
As for what was sown among thorns,
Hmm.
and I think this can describe a lot of what we're experiencing in our society. What was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing.
Right.
The cares of the world and the lure of wealth. Um, it's an interesting to me. Um, to me, it's interesting. So, one way to review this or to hear this is for the deceitfulness of riches
Hmm.
is one of the cares and lures of the world. Um, and the other one is that concern for spiritual things that is crowded out by material things. And
Yeah.
those are the thorns.
So my theory is, um, I was talking with somebody about this because we were talking about a book, and true to my credit, I don't remember the name of the book. Um, but it talks about there is no such thing as multitasking.
Mm,
You can only do one thing at a time. You can do something, stop, do something else, and then come back, but you can only do one thing at a time. And I think for many people, the bandwidth is just not there. There's so many
right.
things happening in their lives that the spirit of the Word of God just gets pushed out. There's just not enough room.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes as the church, we have to find ways to help people make room. One of the things that we talk about here is having what's called a rule of life. And in that rule of life, you talk about, okay, this is what it means to work. This is, how I play and have leisure. This is how I study. This is how I pray. These are how I have relationships with people. And there's a certain sense of structure and
Mm-hmm.
order to our life. And that appeals to some people. It doesn't appeal to everyone.
Right.
But it's this notion of how do I make room for God to be in my life? If I'm not intentional about it and I don't do it on purpose, it is not prone to happening.
That is very true. The thorns themselves, there is a particular type of thorny weed that grows that when it's germinating, when it's about this tall, it
Mm-hmm.
looks just like wheat. But you have to wait for it to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And when it grows, the thorns grow to 6 feet tall.
Mm.
They can greatly outstrip the growth of wheat. And and that's the type of thing that chokes out what the wheat is trying to grow. And it's so much about the lure of wealth or the deceitfulness of riches, the cares of the world. When it initially starts to grow, it sure looks like spirituality. It sure looks like God. But then when it starts to grow, we suddenly realize that it's worth nothing.
So I'll tell a story here, and I'm going to tell one on my dad. I don't get a chance to do that often, but I'm going to tell one on him
Nice.
because as parents, and I have to be careful with this myself. I can't let myself fall into this trap. But as parents, if I'm not careful, I can fall into the trap of telling my children that the most important thing is not what God is calling them to do, not what is burning in their hearts, but about money and being solvent and financially stable and all these things if I'm not careful. And
Mhm.
I remember, telling my dad, I want to be a priest. And his first question was, do they offer dental?
Nice. Wow.
I mean, come on, that's a good one. You know,
No, no, that's very good. That's
you
very
know,
good.
and so it wasn't about, oh, you're going to help people, or oh, it's a life dedicated to God. It's, oh, are you taken care of?
Hmm.
You know, um, I hear a lot of pressure being placed on young people to be financially successful.
Right, right.
You've got to make X amount of dollars, and our society is telling you if you don't have this amount of money, then you are not successful, you are not valued, you're wasting your time.
Hmm.
And how many people who I think could be working in charity or caring for others or in the life of the church, but they're not getting the message that what's most important is not the lure of wealth, but instead the promise of the kingdom.
Hmm. Yes. Which grows.
Right.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And as parents, it's really hard that if our children said, well, I want to major in English, and we're like, so then you would sell oranges by the side of the street, that it's
Yeah, I mean,
right.
yeah.
It is hard not to do that and to let them be who they are. Yeah. It, anyway, you've gotten me thinking about that.
Yeah.
So the cares of the world and the lure of wealth and choking out the world.
Yeah.
Um, I'm sorry, choking out the word. I added an L. Um, yeah. But as for what was sown on the good soil, this is the one who hears, who understands, and who bears. Those are all the verbs. the one who hears it, understands it, and bears fruit. And
And it's wonderful that in the parable, and of course in the explanation of the parable, Jesus gives the formula to say, this is what happens to those on the rocky soil, on the thorn. But I'm giving you the formula to go ahead and bear fruit.
mhm.
Hear, understand. Well, that means the church has a lot of work to do to get people to hear and understand.
Oh yeah, the harvest is great.
Yeah.
Um, Laborers are few, but yes, it's there. Um, so uh, the other thing, if I can go back to
Hmm.
the rocky, because you brought up the rocky ground is the one who receives the word with joy, but it has no root. And then when trouble arises, yeah, that I think we can all feel that way. And um, so the difficulty is that um, what lands on the good soil is also heard with joy,
Yeah.
um, and then building roots. And so um, the rule of life that you talked about is a way to build roots. That having a pattern, a way of life, having listening to us weekly, whatever the case is, that that's building a sense of roots as we cast out more seeds, so that you can receive it in joy, and then it starts to build its own roots. So I'm not sure how to end this today, but I'm having a lot of fun talking about parables, but I don't know how long folks will hang on listening to us talking about them.
Well, I think what we can kind of end with is the understanding of, if you didn't get the parable fully, it's okay,
Right.
because parables are confusing and they're meant to be constantly studied throughout your life. What
Mm-hmm.
you heard at age 10 and 30 and 60 and 90, it's going to change.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the important thing is that what we've talked about today has set a stage and set the soil for our conversations about the parables to hopefully take root and bear fruit.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And to keep listening.
Exactly. Tune in, next week, same bat time, same bat channel.
Yeah. And if you're at the grocery store or whatever, and you smile at somebody and they don't smile back, that's okay. It just landed on soil, got burned up by the heat, whatever the case is. That you just keep smiling, you just keep loving, you keep offering forgiveness, and some of those seeds land, and they will produce 100-fold.
Exactly. You never know. Never know.
Yep. And the last thing is, don't choke out your friends. Um,
No, don't do that.
Don't do that. And I say that because if I could show you a picture of my monitor, that your face is like right here, and I've got stuff all around you that I'm reading from and various sources. But I'm not choking you out, brother. You're dead center. So I can so I can see your smiling face
Well,
in
well, I
amongst all of the various references. So don't choke out one another either.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate that you and I help one another to hopefully bear fruit, plant some seeds, and to bear fruit.
And at least to build a bridge.
There you go.
It
Perfect
sounds
way
like
to
a
end it.
parable. Yeah,
Perfect way to
perfect.
end it. There you go.
All
Well,
right,
it's
brother.
been
Thanks for sharing your time with me and for sowing your seeds. And it's been a lot of fun.
all right. It's been a lot of fun for me too. Thank you, and we'll catch everybody in the next one. Thanks,
God
everyone.
bless.